I never thought a simple trip to the weekend market would turn into one of the scariest moments of my life. It was supposed to be a small, happy treat for my youngest daughter's birthday. Nothing fancy, just her, a little money to spend, and the freedom to pick out whatever she wanted. I thought it would be a memory she would treasure, a tiny bubble of joy in what had been a long, difficult year. But then the phone rang. Welcome to Stories by Amy. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now, let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. Her voice was trembling, almost breaking through the phone. Mom, some women, they won't leave me alone. She was crying, her words choppy and scared. My heart stopped. Panic rose like a tight knot in my chest. I grabbed my eldest daughter's hand and we ran toward the market, my mind racing with fear. When we arrived, I saw them. 6 older women standing around my youngest like they owned the space, their faces hard and judgmental. They were speaking in sharp, precise tones, pointing fingers, lecturing her about things I couldn't fully process in the moment. Words about being a good granddaughter, about Christian duty, about how we were failing a man who had left our lives months ago. My eldest whispered, "Mom, they're yelling at her." I didn't answer right away. I felt my chest tight, and for a moment I could barely breathe. My youngest looked so small, almost fragile in the middle of these women. I could see her hands shaking, her eyes wet with tears. My instinct was simple: protect at all costs. I stepped forward, placing myself between her and the women. "That's enough," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You will leave her alone." They didn't. "She doesn't respect her grandparents," one said, her tone sharp and accusing. "She's refusing to see her brothers, the poor boys." Another added, wagging her finger as though my daughter were some terrible criminal. Inside, a quiet anger began to grow. They had no idea of what my daughters had endured. They had no idea of the trauma, the grief, the sleepless nights in therapy sessions. They didn't know about the affair, the loss, or the small, careful steps we had taken to heal. They only knew the story my ex-mother-in-law had spun, a carefully curated tale of me and my daughters as cruel, selfish, heartless. My eldest daughter nudged me. "Go pay for the stuff we need to leave," she whispered. I nodded quickly. She helped my youngest gather her things and guided her to the car. I stayed behind, facing the women. My thoughts were a swirl of anger, sadness, and disbelief. "You have no right," I said quietly. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Leave her alone." But their voices only grew louder. They accused me of failing my daughters, of corrupting them, of turning them away from the path of God. The noise, the judgment, the unrelenting barrage of words, it was suffocating. I tried to remain calm, to breathe slowly, to keep my voice even, but my heart raced with a combination of fear and righteous anger. Eventually, the market staff intervened. They asked us to leave. The women, still glaring, followed us to the car like a group of vultures. I managed to get my daughters inside and lock the doors. I could feel their panic slowly fading as I started the car, but I knew the worry wouldn't leave my mind. Driving away, I thought about how quickly everything had escalated. A simple birthday treat, a peaceful morning at the market, had turned into a nightmare. I thought about the women, about my daughters, about the injustice of it all. And most of all, I thought about my ex-mother-in-law. This had to have come from her. It had to. Later, after my daughters were asleep, I sat quietly in the living room. My body was still tense, my mind still racing. I pulled out my phone, hoping to find some explanation. That's when I learned the full story, the one my ex-mother-in-law had carefully crafted and shared with her church community. And the realization hit me hard: the battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. That night, the house felt unusually still. Even the air seemed thick, like it was holding all the emotions we hadn't yet processed. My daughters had gone to their rooms early, exhausted from the day's shock. I stood alone in the kitchen for a while, one hand resting on the counter, just breathing. What just happened today? The question repeated in my head in a loop, slow and heavy. I made myself pour a cup of tea, hoping the warmth would settle the coldness I still felt in my chest. But even after the first few sips, the trembling didn't quite fade. Something in me had shifted. Something protective, primal and tired. So very tired. I walked to the living room, sat on the edge of the couch, and finally unlocked my phone. Part of me didn't want to know anything more. But another part, the mother part, the one always calculating danger and safety, needed clarity, needed to understand where this attack had come from. And unsurprisingly, it led straight back to her, my ex-mother-in-law. I stared at the screen as message after message from people I barely knew trickled in. Some were concerned, some confused, some avoided saying anything directly, but their words circled around the same theme. I heard there's trouble with the girls. Is everything okay with their father's family? Someone told us you'd been keeping the boys away. My breath caught. The boys? No, 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 she didn't, but she did. She had told everyone, her prayer group, her church friends, even distant relatives, that my daughters were refusing to see their brothers because of me, that I was feeding them bitterness, turning them cold, keeping them from family reconciliation. Not one word about what really happened. Not one mention of the man who had blown our lives apart. Not one mention of the emotional wounds my daughters were still healing from. It was the perfect story for her. My daughters equals disrespectful. Me equals vindictive mother. Their son equals the poor victim. I leaned back and closed my eyes. A slow exhale escaped before I could stop it. How many times are we going to have to pay for his mistakes? The thing is, I didn't hate her. I never had. For years, I tried to be patient with her, tried to respect her ways, even when she overstepped. I always wanted my daughters to have a relationship with their grandparents. But since the divorce, since the affair, since everything broke, she had aimed her entire grief at us, as though hurting us would put her family back together. And now she had taken it one step further. She sent people after my children. I sat quietly with that thought, and then slowly I started to remember not just today but the years leading up to it. Looking back, the signs were always there. Small moments I brushed aside. Comments I smiled through. Questions I answered with careful honesty. There was a time when she treated me like the daughter she never had. Holidays with her felt warm, cozy. She'd hug me, fuss over the girls, insist I call her mom. And I did. I genuinely cared for her. But after the separation, after her son admitted the affair, admitted the lies, something in her shifted sharply. She stopped seeing me, stopped seeing my daughters, stopped seeing the truth. She clung to him like he was drowning, and instead of helping him rise, she tried to pull everyone underwater with him. I remember a conversation shortly after everything came out. I had gone to her house to return some of my ex's belongings. She met me at the door, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Why are you doing this to him?" she said. I blinked, caught completely off guard. "Doing what?" "This divorce, all this drama, you've ruined him." I remember standing there, holding a cardboard box, hearing my heart thud in my ears. I tried to stay calm. I always tried to stay calm. "He ruined the marriage," I said quietly. "Not me." She shook her head like I was a stubborn child. "Marriage is forgiveness. If you were stronger, you would have fixed it." I looked down at the box in my hands, the shirts, the books, the cologne, things that once meant home. It suddenly felt heavier. "I was the only one trying to fix it," I said softly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't want to hear that. She never did. That was the beginning. My daughters are strong, stronger than they realize, but they're also sensitive. They feel deeply, love deeply, break deeply. When their father left, it tore something inside them that I couldn't mend overnight. My eldest tried to stay composed at first. She bottled everything, stayed busy, helped around the house, acted fine. But late at night, she'd knock on my door with silent tears and ask, "Mom." Why was I enough for him to stay faithful? My youngest didn't hide her pain. She cried openly. She asked questions no child should have to ask. She became afraid to go places alone, scared she might run into someone who'd pretend everything was normal. My ex never apologized to them properly. Not once. And his mother? She told everyone the girls were being dramatic. I remember the day my youngest decided she didn't want to visit her grandparents anymore. She had come home from a weekend stay looking drained. I found her sitting on her bed, hugging her knees. "What happened, baby?" I asked, sitting beside her. She hesitated. "Grandma kept saying Dad misses us, that we make him sad. She said we need to stop acting spoiled." I felt anger rise, but I kept my voice soft. "How did that make you feel?" She shrank a little. "Like it's my fault he left." I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight. "Oh, sweetheart, none of this is your fault." That night she asked if she had to visit them anymore, and I said no. No more forcing anything that hurt them. My eldest soon made the same choice. But in my ex-mother-in-law's retelling of the story, my daughters rejected them out of cruelty, out of disrespect, out of influence from me. She made them villains to excuse her son's sins. Then there were the boys, my daughters, half-brothers on their father's side. Sweet kids. Innocent. Completely untouched by the bitterness swirling around them. I never once told my daughters they couldn't see their brothers. In fact, I encouraged it. But healing is complicated, grief is messy, and being in spaces connected to their father still triggered them. They needed time, space, patience. Their grandmother gave them none of those things. Instead, she told the church, loudly, frequently, that my daughters hated the boys, that I had poisoned them, that we were blocking the will of God for family unity. So when those 6 women approached my youngest at the market, they were operating off of a script she had written, one where my daughters were villains in need of correction. After scrolling through all the messages, I finally set my phone aside and let myself feel everything. I rubbed my forehead, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees. The house was too quiet. It made my thoughts louder. How long has this been going on? How many people has she told? How many think my daughters are heartless? A small part of me wondered if I should go over to her house, talk to her again, explain things calmly. But another part, the wiser part, reminded me that reason had never worked with her. Not once. She listened only when words matched her chosen version of the truth. I breathed in slowly, out slowly. I reminded myself I wasn't powerless, and neither were my daughters. But God, I was tired. The next morning, the girls came to the table silently, both still shaken. I made breakfast, trying to keep things peaceful: eggs, fruit toast, familiar routines, warm smells. My eldest finally spoke. "Mom, why did they do that? Why would strangers talk to her like that?" Her voice was calm but confused, hurt threaded between each word. I sighed. "Because Grandma told them things that aren't true." My youngest looked down at her plate. "She hates us." I reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "No, she doesn't hate you, she just doesn't understand how much you've been hurting, and she refuses to see it." "She refuses to see anything," my eldest muttered. I didn't argue, she wasn't wrong. I spent the next hour explaining what I'd found, the messages, the rumors, the story their grandmother had spread. My youngest's eyes welled with tears again. "So she made them think I'm a bad person." "No," I said softly. "She made them think she's the victim." My eldest leaned back, frustration etched on her face. If Dad had told the truth, if he hadn't lied to everyone, none of this would be happening. And there it was, the wound beneath all wounds. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice low, "people lie when they're ashamed, and sometimes it's easier for them to rewrite the story than face the pain they caused." We sat in silence for a moment. Then my eldest said, almost whispering, "Mom, what do we do now?" I looked at them, these 2 girls I would protect with everything I had, and felt something settle inside me. Something calm, steady, determined. "We tell our truth," I said, "and we stop letting anyone else write it for us." A new resolve that day was a turning point. I could feel it. I realized that while I couldn't control what their grandmother said or what strangers believed, I could control how we responded. I could control the boundaries we set, the healing we prioritized, the way we protected our peace. I couldn't fix her denial. I couldn't undo her stories. But I could make sure my daughters never again stood alone in front of people who wished to shame them. I spent the afternoon journaling, something I hadn't done in months, writing out every thought, every fear, every bit of anger and sorrow. It felt like releasing weight from my chest. Later, I stood by the window watching the girls outside. My eldest was helping her sister with homework. They laughed softly, heads bent in concentration. For a moment, they looked like the children they used to be before everything shattered. I whispered to myself, almost like a vow, "They will not break them, they will not break us." And as the sun dipped behind the houses, I finally felt the smallest flicker of peace enter my body again. I sometimes think back to that morning and wonder if I missed any signs. Maybe there was something in the air I could have sensed. Some strange heaviness. Some whisper telling me to keep my daughters close. But life rarely warns us. It lets us walk forward until we are standing right inside the moment that changes everything. That moment arrived in pieces for me, not all at once. First, the frightened phone call, then the running through the market, then the confrontation, and much later, the truth that hurt in a different, quieter way. But the rising conflict, the part where everything seemed to stack on top of everything else, began right after we drove away from the market. That is when the emotional weight settled on my chest like a slow, steady pressure. My youngest sat in the back seat with her knees pulled to her chest. She had stopped crying, but her breathing came in uneven waves. My oldest sat beside her, one hand lightly resting on her sister's arm, grounding her, steadying her. I drove with both hands gripping the wheel. I didn't speak. There were so many words I wanted to say. But I knew if I opened my mouth, my voice might shake. So I stayed quiet. I let the silence calm all three of us. We needed a moment where nothing new happened, where the world didn't ask anything more of us. At one point, my oldest whispered, "Mom, they were really harsh. They surrounded her. It looked scary." I nodded. My throat felt tight. "I know," I managed to say softly. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." My youngest sniffled and wiped her face. "They called me unchristian," she whispered. Her voice was thin, fragile, as if they know me. "They don't know anything about me." "I know," I repeated, and inside something warm and protective curled up like a fist. Not anger. I don't think I have it in me anymore to feel real anger. More like a slow, steady sadness that wanted to shield them from everything painful. We arrived home quietly. The girls went straight to their rooms. I stood alone in the kitchen, still holding my car keys, trying to process what had happened. The house felt too still, too quiet for what we had experienced. I placed my keys on the counter and leaned against the edge of the kitchen table. The wood felt cool beneath my palms, almost grounding. I tried to breathe slowly. I tried to think clearly. But all I felt was the heaviness of the moment, the unfairness of it. These women at the market, why did they feel entitled to corner a child? Why did they think they had the right to call my daughter names? I thought about the words they had thrown at her. Words wrapped in judgment. Words shaped by someone else's lies. And I thought about my ex-mother-in-law. I thought about her sharp tongue and her constant need for control. I thought about how she always cared more about appearances than truth, about how church reputation mattered more to her than her grandchildren's well-being. I felt something settle in me then, something calm and steady, a feeling like a deeply rooted decision beginning to take form, but I didn't know yet what that decision would become. Not then. That came later. After the girls went to sleep, I made myself a cup of tea. I sat on the couch in the dim living room light. The quiet of the night wrapped around me. I needed to understand what happened at the market. It felt too coordinated, too intentional. Those women didn't just randomly decide to lecture a teenager. Someone had fed them a story. Someone had pointed them toward my daughters. And I already knew who it was. I just didn't know the extent of it. So I messaged someone from my ex-in-law's church, someone who had always been kind to me, someone who once admitted that my ex-mother-in-law could be a bit dramatic. In his words, that was a polite way of saying emotionally exhausting. I typed out what happened at the market. Then I waited, and waited, and waited. My tea cooled on the table. My legs tucked beneath me as I stared at my phone. I didn't want to disturb the girls, so I stayed in the living room. The house felt like it was holding its breath alongside me. Finally, his message came. "Can I call you? This is serious." My stomach tightened. I typed back, "Yes, the girls are asleep." He called immediately. His voice held a quiet tension, like he didn't want to say what he had to say, but he said it anyway, and each word made my chest feel heavier. "Your ex-mother-in-law posted something on the church page," he said. "It's been getting a lot of attention." I could hear papers rustling on his side of the line. Maybe he printed it. Maybe he was reading it again just to make sure he was getting the words right. People in that church took their Facebook group very seriously. "She told everyone that you and the girls have abandoned them," he continued. "She said you're leaving them homeless and without any support." I closed my eyes for a moment. I breathed out slowly. I let his words settle, even though they stung. "She said you refused to take in the boys." My heart tightened. He paused before adding softly, "She didn't mention the affair." Of course she didn't. The church despised cheating. She had to create a new storyline, one where she and her husband were the victims, one where I was the cold, heartless woman turning my back on two innocent children. My voice was calm when I finally spoke. "What exactly did she say about the boys?" He hesitated. Then he read it to me, her entire post, her entire fabricated story. Her story about how the babies were surrogacy children that I didn't want because they were boys. Her story about how she begged me to open my heart and my home. Her story about how I refused because my heart had hardened. Every word was false. Every sentence bent truth until it broke. My fingers trembled slightly, not with anger, but with something deeper. A sadness that felt heavy enough to bend my spine. When he finished reading, he sighed. "I'm really sorry," he said. "People believed her. That's why those women came after your daughter. They thought they were helping. Helping, harassing a child, calling her unchristian, calling her selfish, calling her uncaring about her baby brothers. Baby brothers, the words echoed in my mind. My daughters had been forced to face the truth of those babies in the worst possible way. They didn't need strangers reminding them. They didn't need more trauma. I thanked him quietly for telling me, and when I hung up the phone, I sat in silence. Long, heavy silence. I didn't cry, I didn't shout, I didn't shake, I just sat there. Sometimes calmness doesn't come from peace. Sometimes it comes from exhaustion, a kind of emotional tiredness that settles deep in your bones. A tiredness that makes you think clearly, even when you're hurting. I thought about my daughters asleep upstairs. I thought about their young hearts, still healing from the loss of their father, the betrayal, the fear, the confusion. They were just beginning to feel steady again. Just beginning to breathe without heaviness. And now this. Another wave, another wound. I whispered to myself, they've been through enough. Those words felt like a decision forming, a quiet one but firm. I woke up early. The sun had barely risen. The world outside was washed in soft gray light. My daughters were still asleep. The house felt calm. But inside me something was already moving. Not anger, not revenge, just a gentle certainty. A quiet need for truth to breathe. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. I thought about everything my ex-in-laws had done. The lies, the guilt tripping, the emotional manipulation, the constant need to rewrite history. I thought about the evidence I still had stored away. Not because I ever planned to use it, but because I needed it during the divorce. Photos, messages, emails, screenshots, conversations, proof of everything, proof of the affair, proof of their involvement, proof of their cruelty, proof of the pressure they placed on my daughters. All the pieces were there. They had existed quietly for months, untouched, unseen. I stared at the sunlight slowly filling the kitchen, and I realized I had reached my limit, not the angry kind, but the quiet, steady kind, the kind where you decide not to let anyone hurt your children anymore. I whispered softly into the still morning air, no more. I knew what I had to do, not out of spite, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. For my daughters, for myself, for the truth, my ex-mother-in-law had publicly shamed us. She had used her church community to attack my daughters. She had turned a place of worship into a weapon. She had twisted the truth until it no longer resembled reality. So I made a decision that felt strong in its simplicity. I would no longer protect the secret that wasn't mine to protect. If she wanted to tell a story, then I would tell the real one. I took one deep breath, and then another. And then I stood up and walked toward the closet where I kept the divorce documents. The rising conflict was no longer emotional. It was becoming something else, something practical, something prepared, but still calm, still purposeful, still protective. And that decision led directly to what happened next, the turning point. The moment everything shifted. There are moments in life when the world feels unusually quiet, not peaceful, not comforting, just still. Still in a way that makes you aware that something important is about to happen. That quietness filled my home the morning after the market incident. It wasn't a silence that asked for rest. It was a silence that asked for clarity, for honesty, for decisions that had been avoiding the surface for too long. I stood in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that I barely touched. The light coming through the window was soft and pale, the kind of light that makes everything feel suspended. My daughters were still asleep upstairs, and for the first time in a long time I felt something steady forming inside me. Not anger, not fear, something simpler. A quiet resolve. I whispered to myself, "This has gone too far." And that was the moment everything began to turn, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the slow, intentional certainty of someone who knows that the truth cannot stay hidden forever. When my ex-husband was alive and our marriage was falling apart, I saved everything. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The affair, the messages, the photos, the conversations with his parents, the things they said about me, the things they said about my daughters, all of it lived in folders I had tucked away and avoided looking at. I kept them because the divorce required it. Proof, documentation, record of betrayal, record of behavior. But after my ex-husband died, I stopped opening those folders. His death was complicated enough. My daughter's grief was heavy and raw. The secrets they discovered were painful. The way his parents tried to rewrite history was exhausting. The last thing I ever wanted was to reopen that old wound. I wanted my girls to heal. I wanted peace. I wanted to close the book on that part of our lives. But when the women at the market surrounded my daughter, when they told her she was unchristian, when they shamed her about the affair babies, when they said she was refusing to be a good sister, when they judged her without knowing a single truth, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger, just a quiet understanding. My ex-mother-in-law had brought private pain into public spaces. She had created a story that harmed my daughters, and she was using her church as a platform. I couldn't allow that. Not anymore. So I walked to the hallway closet where the old divorce box sat. I placed my hand on it. The cardboard felt cold. My fingers hesitated before lifting the lid. It wasn't fear, it was sadness. Sadness that something so private had to be revisited, but I opened it anyway. Inside were the documents I once believed would help me let go. Instead, they became the tools for the turning point. I carried the box to the dining table. I sat down slowly. My movements felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. Almost like I was unfolding chapters I thought I had finished writing. I opened the first folder. The photos appeared, images of my ex-husband and the woman he had the affair with, the two of them together in places that used to belong to me, our living room, our backyard, moments captured without permission, moments that once shattered my heart. I placed my hand on top of the photos. I took a deep breath. I didn't feel the same pain anymore, just a distant ache. A quiet reminder of everything we had survived. Next came the text messages, his conversations, his confessions, his words to her, his words to me, his promises to his parents' encouragement, their dismissive response to my pain, their belief that the affair wasn't a big deal, their insistence that a man needs comfort when his wife is too busy. I remembered the day I read those messages the first time. My hands shook then. My breath came fast. I felt like the world was collapsing, but now, reading them again, I felt calm, detached, as if I was reading someone else's story, as if I had already accepted that chapter was over. But the most painful folder was the one with the messages they sent to my daughters. Those messages still carried weight, words like bastards, words like your fault, words like you ruined your father's life, words like he died because you told the truth. I stared at those messages for a long time. Not out of anger, but out of sadness for the grandparents my daughters deserved and never had. My daughters had been blamed for telling me the truth. They were just children then. Children who had stumbled upon something that broke their hearts. Children who had been honest. Children who saved me by sharing what they discovered. Children who carried guilt they never deserved. And the messages showed just how cruel my ex-in-laws had been to them. I closed the folder gently, not to hide the hurt, but because I had seen enough to know what needed to be done. I pushed my chair back slowly and stood up. My hands rested on the edge of the table and I took a steady breath. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to humiliate anyone. I didn't want drama. I wanted truth, for my daughters, for myself, for anyone who had been fed lies. I whispered softly into the quiet room, "This ends now." And for the first time since my ex-husband died, I felt something like control. Not power, not dominance, just control over my own story. I decided to gather everything. Every photo, every message, every email, every screenshot, every piece of the truth that had been hidden beneath the lies my ex-mother-in-law spread. But gathering it wasn't enough. I knew how her church worked. They valued presentation, structure, order. They believed in things that were handed out neatly, organized, complete. If I wanted the truth to be seen, I needed to speak their language. So I came up with an idea. A quiet idea, a methodical idea, one that felt fitting in a strange, poetic way. I would make binders, not messy piles of evidence, not scattered documents, but clean, organized booklets that told the real story from start to finish. The way they used hymn books to guide people through songs, I would use binders to guide them through the truth. The thought didn't make me smile. It didn't make me feel powerful. It simply made sense, so I grabbed my purse and keys. I took the evidence folders with me, and I drove to the print shop. Walking into the print shop felt like stepping into a completely different world. The air smelled faintly of paper and ink. Machines hummed quietly in the background. There was something peaceful about the place, something structured, something clean. A young employee at the counter greeted me with a gentle smile. "Good morning," he said. "How can I help you today?" His voice was warm and friendly. For a moment, I felt slightly emotional. It had been a long time since someone spoke to me without judgment, without assumptions, without expectations. "I need to print some documents," I said quietly. "They're important, and I need them in high-quality color on good paper." He nodded and gestured to the computer station. "Take your time. When you're ready, I'll help with the paper choices." I sat at the computer and began uploading the files. Each image appeared on the screen. Each message. Each painful piece of truth. The screens felt bright against the dim memories, almost too bright, but I kept going. When I finished, I approached the employee again. He showed me different paper options. Glossy, matte linen premium cardstock. I chose a high-quality matte paper, one that felt sturdy but not flashy. It felt right. The truth didn't need shine, it just needed clarity. He asked, "Do you want each page separated or in packets?" His question held no judgment, just curiosity. Just professionalism. "In packets," I said softly. "Multiple copies, and please make sure the images are printed clearly." He nodded. "No problem, it'll take a little while, you can sit if you like." So I sat, I folded my hands in my lap, I listened to the machines working. I felt each minute pass with a calm heaviness, a heaviness filled with purpose. When the employee finally returned, he carried a neat stack of printed pages. Thick, clean, perfectly aligned. "Everything printed beautifully," he said. "Do you want anything else done with them?" I nodded once. "I'd like to purchase binders, something simple, plain, white or cream colored." He led me to a shelf. I picked out the plainest binders they had, soft off-white covers, matte finish, no designs, no decorations. They reminded me of hymn booklets, small, unassuming, but meant to be held and read closely. I paid for everything. The print job, the binders, the paper, the extra pages. It cost more than I expected, but I didn't hesitate. My daughter's piece was worth more than any price. When I left the shop, the stack of materials felt surprisingly light in my arms, as if the truth itself weighed less than the lies we had been carrying. Back home, I placed everything on the dining table. My daughters were still upstairs, resting. I wanted them to stay unaware for now. They had endured too much already. I opened the first binder. The blank cover stared back at me. Quiet. Neutral, waiting, I began placing the pages inside. One by one, carefully, deliberately. I wasn't just assembling papers. I was assembling a story, a true one, a painful one, but one that needed to be seen. The first page was the photo of my ex-husband kissing the woman he had the affair with. Their faces were clear, their posture unmistakably intimate. The caption I added was simple, the truth behind the story. I didn't use sarcasm. I didn't use bitterness, just clarity. The next pages were the messages, dates, times, their words in their own text bubbles, no commentary needed. The messages spoke for themselves. After that came the emails, the conversations with his parents, their support of the affair, their dismissal of my pain, their statements that men make mistakes and wives are supposed to forgive. Then came the messages they sent to my daughters. I added a page before those messages with a simple line, "These were sent to children." I handled each page gently. Not because the content deserved gentleness, but because my daughters did, and this was for them. I made binder after binder, each one identical, each one quietly, methodically organized. It took hours, but I didn't feel tired. I felt focused, steady, centered. When I finished, I stacked them neatly on the table. A row of simple binders, small, plain, unremarkable, but filled with truth. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The house was silent again. My daughters were still asleep. I didn't want them to wake up to see me leaving with the binders. Not because I was hiding it, but because I wanted to protect them from feeling responsible. I carried the binders to the car. The sky was still dark, the air cool, the street quiet. The church wasn't far. I parked in the back near the side entrance. The doors were unlocked just as they always were early in the morning. Some members liked to come early to pray, others came to prepare for service. Inside, the lights were dim, soft, calm. Rows of pews stretched forward in silence. The space smelled faintly of old wood and paper. There was a desk near the entrance where the hymn booklets were kept. The same desk my ex-mother-in-law used to organize. The same desk where people took song sheets and prayer booklets before service. I placed the binders gently on the desk. Not hidden, not displayed either, just there, available, quietly waiting to be seen. Then I stepped back. I stood in the stillness of the church for a moment, not praying, not hoping for anything, just breathing, just letting go. This was not about revenge. This was not about humiliation. This was about truth, truth that had been twisted, truth that had been burdening my daughters, truth that needed air. I turned around and walked out slowly. The morning sun was just beginning to rise, and for the first time in a long time I felt lighter, not victorious, not triumphant, just lighter, as if releasing the truth had unburdened something inside me. I didn't stay to watch what would happen. I didn't hide around corners or wait for reactions. I simply went home. And that morning, when my daughters came downstairs for breakfast, I smiled at them softly. I didn't mention the binders. I didn't mention the church. I didn't mention what I had done. All I said was, "Good morning, sweetheart. How did you sleep?" Because the turning point wasn't just about exposing lies. It was about reclaiming peace. It was about choosing honesty over fear. It was about protecting the people who mattered most. And as the day unfolded, the world began to react not to me but to the truth I had quietly placed where everyone could see it. I remember sitting there after closing my laptop, my hands resting on the table. The quiet of my living room felt different that night. Not peaceful, not warm, just heavy, like the air itself was thinking with me. And in that silence, something inside me finally shifted. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was something much quieter, much calmer, almost sad in its own way. A realization that I had spent years letting other people rewrite the story of my life, and maybe this was the moment I stopped letting them. The next morning, I woke up early, before the girls, before the sun felt fully awake. I made coffee, but I barely drank it. I just sat there with my mug in my hands, staring at the window and thinking about everything that brought me to this point. My marriage, the betrayal, the divorce, the accident, the grief, the confusion, and now this bizarre new chapter I never imagined living through. People say life comes full circle, but I never pictured the circle looking like this. Me, a tired mother, about to expose the truth in the most unexpected way possible. I kept replaying yesterday's moment at the market, my youngest crying. Those women surrounding her, the looks on their faces, the judgment, the venom masked as religion. I felt something twist inside me every time the memory resurfaced. And maybe that's what pushed me forward, not revenge, but a quiet, protective love for my daughters, a love that said no more. Later that morning, when the girls were still asleep, I quietly went through the folders in my desk drawer, the ones I had used during the divorce process. The papers were neatly organized. I had always been the organizer in our home, the one who kept track of bills, school paperwork, schedules, insurance, all the pieces that kept life running smoothly. As I flipped through everything, the memories hit me in slow waves. The text messages, the emails, the photographs, it had been months since I looked at any of them. At the time, I had collected them because I needed proof. Proof for myself. Proof for the lawyer. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that I deserved better. Now holding them again, I felt something else entirely. Not pain, not shock, just clarity. These weren't just proof. They were the truth, and I had allowed the truth to sit quietly in a drawer while everyone else loudly told lies. My ex-mother-in-law and her husband had created their own story, a fabricated, polished, self-pitying version of the past. And for some reason, people believed them because they were old, because they looked fragile, because they cried loudly. Because playing the victim is easier than taking responsibility. I didn't want to become like them, someone who weaponized pain and twisted it into manipulation. But I also didn't want my daughters growing up believing that silence was the same as strength. Sometimes, silence only teaches people that they can walk all over you, so I gathered everything. Every document, every printout, every screenshot. And one by one, I placed them in a large folder. Not to hurt anyone. Not to start a war, but to end one. Around 9 a.m., my oldest daughter walked into the kitchen, Her hair was messy, her eyes still tired, but she gave me a soft smile. "Morning, Mom." "Morning, sweetheart," I said gently. She walked over and hugged me from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder. "You okay?" she asked quietly. I took a small breath. "Yes," I said. "Are you?" She hesitated. A tiny pause, but I could feel the heaviness she had been carrying. "I'm still shaken, I guess," she whispered. She was so scared. "And those women," she stopped talking for a moment. "I just don't understand why people are like that." I turned slightly and hugged her back. "Some people think they're doing the right thing," I said. "They think they're saving someone or defending someone or following something they believe. It doesn't excuse it, but it explains it." She nodded slowly. "But it still felt wrong." "It was wrong," I said softly. We stayed silent for a moment. She didn't ask what I was doing with all the papers spread out on the table. Maybe she already knew. Maybe she had expected it before I did. Then she said something that surprised me. "Mom, do whatever you need to do. We trust you." It was such a simple sentence. But for me, it held more weight than anything anyone had told me in a long time. Around noon, the girls went to their rooms. They had schoolwork and projects, and honestly, they needed a quiet day. I stayed in the living room and continued organizing everything I planned to print. While working, I found an email I had forgotten about. It was one of the very first messages I received after filing for divorce. It was from my ex-mother-in-law. The subject line still made me shake my head. "A real Christian wife forgives." I remember reading that email months ago with trembling hands. Back then, those words sank into my chest like stones. I questioned myself. I doubted myself. I wondered whether leaving was a mistake. But today, reading it again, I didn't feel doubt. I felt clarity. Forgiveness doesn't mean staying silent while someone destroys your family. Forgiveness doesn't mean folding yourself into a shape that makes others comfortable. Forgiveness doesn't mean being a doormat. Forgiveness is peace. Peace is truth. And truth is what I was finally ready to bring into the light. By early afternoon, I drove to the print shop. It was the same one I used last year for legal documents. The place was quiet, the kind of quiet where a soft bell rings when you open the door and gentle music plays in the background. The woman behind the counter recognized me from before. "Oh, hello," she said with a warm smile. "Long time no see." "Yes," I said softly. "I just need to print some things." "Of course," she said kindly. "Take your time." I used one of the computers and uploaded everything. One file at a time. One truth at a time. Every picture, every message, every email. I organized them carefully into a printing order because I wanted everything to flow. I wanted anyone reading these pages to see the whole story, not just the betrayal, not just the lies, but the timeline, the choices, the consequences, the pain inflicted on the girls. When everything was ready, I clicked print. The sound of the machines starting up filled the room with a soft, rhythmic hum. And as I stood there, I felt something loosen inside me. Like a knot that had been tied too tightly for far too long. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't excitement. It was simply relief. A quiet acknowledgement that I was finally taking control of a story that had spiraled far beyond my reach. The woman behind the counter took great care in helping me assemble everything. "These are a lot of pages," she said gently, not judging, just observing. "Yes," I answered. "It's been a long year." She nodded in understanding. "Do you want them in binders or folders?" "Binders," I said. "And can they look like hymn booklets, the small kind?" She blinked in surprise but didn't question it. "Of course, we can do that." I appreciated that she didn't pry. Sometimes the kindest thing a person can do is not ask the questions they're tempted to ask. Hours passed as we worked. By the time we finished, the stack of personalized binders sat on the counter, neat and tidy, almost innocent looking. If someone saw them without opening them, they would never guess what they contained. And for a moment, I just stared at them. Not with pride, not with excitement, just with a quiet, steady sense of readiness. They were the truth, and the truth was finally going back where the lies started. When I got home, the girls were watching TV. They looked up when I walked in, but neither of them asked questions. My oldest simply gave me a small nod. My youngest offered a tiny smile, still fragile but healing. "I'm going to put these upstairs," I told them softly. "Okay," they said together. They trusted me, and honestly, that trust mattered more than anything that would come next. I placed the binders in a bag and set them near the door. I knew I would take them to the church early in the morning, before people arrived, before there were eyes watching, before anyone could start a conversation. The decision was made, but I still felt strangely calm, not anxious, not afraid, just calm. Because I wasn't doing this out of anger. Not anymore. I was doing it for truth, for closure, for my daughters, for us. That night as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling and let my thoughts drift. I thought about my marriage, how it began with love, how it faded into distance, how it cracked with betrayal, how it ended not with finality but with a complicated grief I was still learning to understand. I thought about my ex-in-laws, the way they treated me, the way they treated my daughters, the way they turned their pain outward instead of inward. I thought about the church, the people who had judged us without ever knowing the truth, the people who had whispered or pointed or believed what was easiest to believe. And I thought about my daughters, always my daughters, their hearts, their fears, their healing, their innocence in all of this. And I felt a soft ache in my chest, a quiet hope that maybe tomorrow would be a turning point, not just for me, but for all of us. I closed my eyes gently and whispered to myself, almost like a prayer, "Let the truth finally breathe." I woke up before the sun the next morning. The house was still quiet, and for a few seconds I simply lay there, staring at the soft light on the ceiling. There was a heaviness in my limbs, but my mind felt clear, much clearer than it had in a long time. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't fear. It was simply readiness. A feeling like the tide had finally turned, and all that was left was to step into whatever came next. I moved quietly through the house, careful not to wake the girls. The bag with the binders sat near the front door, just where I left it. I picked it up slowly, like it held both weight and purpose. Before leaving, I paused at the foot of the stairs and listened. The house felt peaceful again, like yesterday's tension had softened overnight. "I'll be back soon," I whispered under my breath, even though no one could hear me. And then I stepped outside. The early morning air was cold but refreshing. The sky was still pale blue, with streaks of soft pink brushing across the horizon. It felt like the day hadn't decided who it wanted to be yet, like it was waiting with me. The drive to the church was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't rush. I just let the silence sit with me. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. When I reached the church, the parking lot was nearly empty. Only the pastor's old sedan was there, parked near the side entrance. A few lights were on inside the building, probably the ones used for early morning preparations. I pulled into a far corner of the lot and sat there for a moment, watching the stillness of the building. It wasn't a place that held good memories for me anymore. It used to, years ago, before things became complicated, before I drifted away, before the judgment began. But today wasn't about the past. Today was about clarity. I grabbed the bag and stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched gently beneath my shoes, and a soft breeze brushed my face as I walked toward the back entrance, the one with the bookshelf where they kept extra hymn packets. It was strange, really, how ordinary the moment felt. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't hesitating. I wasn't second-guessing. It was just me, a quiet morning, and the truth I had carried for far too long. When I walked inside, the church felt colder than I remembered. Not unwelcoming, just empty. Like a place still half asleep. The hallway lights flickered softly, and the faint smell of old wood and hymn books lingered in the air. I made my way to the back of the main sanctuary. No one was there. The chairs were neatly arranged. The stage was dim. And near the back wall stood the small wooden table where the church kept extra hymn packets for anyone who needed one. The perfect spot. The same spot where my ex-mother-in-law had probably placed flyers, prayer requests, and her printed sob story. It felt strangely symbolic. I reached into the bag and took out the binders. Each one neat, each one identical, each one filled with the truth people had refused to see. I placed them on the table gently, not thrown, not hidden, not dramatic, just placed, like the quiet offering of someone who had finally found her voice. I stood there for a moment, staring at them, thinking back to the years I spent shrinking myself for the sake of that family, thinking about the nights I cried alone because I didn't want the girls to hear, thinking about the way my ex-in-laws treated me, as if I were an extension of their son, not an individual with emotions, boundaries, or worth. And I felt something inside me settle. Not triumph. Not revenge, just peace. A soft, quiet peace that whispered, "This is enough." I turned to leave and froze when I saw someone standing near the hallway door. It was the pastor. He wasn't glaring, he wasn't angry, he wasn't stern, just surprised. "Oh," he said softly, "I didn't expect anyone here this early." I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "I was just dropping something off." His eyes moved to the table, but he didn't walk closer. "I see," he murmured, though he clearly didn't. We stood in silence for a moment. The kind of silence where two people share a room but not a history. Then he said, "There's been a lot of talk lately." "Yes," I said quietly, "and a lot of hurt." "Yes." He studied me for a moment, not with accusation, not with suspicion, with something that almost resembled gentleness. "If there is anything you or the girls need," he said slowly, "you're welcome to reach out." It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't an attack either. It was something in between, a reluctant bridge. I nodded once. "I appreciate that." Then I walked past him, leaving the church and all its noise behind me. As I stepped outside, the sun had risen a little higher. The light felt warmer. The air felt easier to breathe. And for the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't walking with a shadow following me. When I got home, both girls were awake. My youngest was sitting at the kitchen table, still in her pajamas, stirring her cereal absent-mindedly. My oldest was leaning against the counter, scrolling on her phone. They both looked up when I entered. "Did you go already?" my oldest asked softly. "I did," I said, "and," my youngest whispered. I walked over to them and placed my hand gently on my youngest's back. "I didn't argue with anyone, I didn't talk to anyone, I didn't confront anyone," I said. "I just delivered the truth, quietly, calmly." My youngest nodded and let out a soft breath, almost like she had been holding it all night. "Good," she said in a small voice. My oldest put her phone down and said, "So, what happens now?" I thought about that for a moment. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But whatever comes next, we handle it together, and we handle it with peace." That seemed to comfort them more than any dramatic speech could have. We spent the rest of the morning together doing normal things: breakfast, schoolwork, laundry. Life didn't pause for the chaos, it never does, and in a strange way that felt grounding. By noon, my phone started buzzing. First with messages, then with calls, then with notifications from social media. I didn't answer anything, I didn't comment, I didn't open messages from numbers I didn't recognize, but it was clear that the binders had done exactly what they needed to do. The truth had spread, slowly at first, then loudly, then relentlessly. My friend from the church, one of the few reasonable people in that place, messaged me privately. "It's chaos here. People saw the binders. People are talking. A lot." I just typed, "Okay." A few minutes later, another message came. "Some are angry at your ex for cheating. Some are furious at his parents for lying. Some are apologizing. Some are pretending they always doubted the story." I could almost picture it, the swirling whispers, the shocked faces, the judgment shifting direction like wind changing course. Then he added, "Your ex-Mill left early. Your ex-Fil looked pale. They didn't defend themselves." I stared at that message for a long moment. It didn't bring joy or satisfaction, just finality, like a chapter quietly turning its last page. Later that evening, after the girls went to their rooms, I sat on the couch with a soft blanket around my shoulders. The house was quiet again. Not heavy, not tense, just quiet. My friend texted again. She's deleted her posts. People are calling her out. Some are telling her to apologize to you and the girls. Some say she should step down from the church committees. Some say she should leave the congregation. I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was accountability. Something she had avoided for years, and something she finally had to face because the truth was no longer hiding in the shadows. Another message came. The pastor made a statement after the service. He said the church will not tolerate lies, manipulation, or harassment. He mentioned your daughters. He said the church owes them kindness. I felt tears prick behind my eyes. Not sadness, not joy, just release, a soft, quiet release. The kind that makes your shoulders drop an inch, the kind that makes your breath come easier, the kind that reminds you that you are finally safe. That night, before going to bed, both girls came into the living room. My youngest sat beside me and leaned her head on my shoulder. My oldest curled up on the other side. None of us spoke at first. We didn't need to. After a while, my oldest whispered, "Mom." "Yes, thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For everything, for protecting us, for standing up for us, for not letting them hurt us anymore." I placed my arms around both of them, and for the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt like the storm had finally moved on. Not completely. There would always be memories. There would always be scars, but the wind had calmed. The thunder had faded. And the sky was slowly clearing. We stayed like that for a long time. Just the three of us, together, safe, healing. And in that quiet moment, I realized something important. The truth didn't fix everything, but it freed us. And maybe that was enough. I remember sitting in my car for a long moment after the door slammed shut behind me. The world outside was quiet, almost too quiet, like everything was holding its breath right along with me. I could still feel the weight of everything that had happened, every word, every confession, every truth that had shaken the foundation of my life. I was free, technically, but inside I felt like a glass that someone had dropped, not shattered, just cracked in places only I could feel. When I finally drove away, I didn't even know where I was heading. The city lights blurred past me in long streaks, and the sky was a deep, slow blue, as if evening was taking its time to settle in. I rolled down the window slightly, hoping the cold air would clear my head, or at least give my heart something else to feel. I whispered to myself, barely audible, "Just breathe one thing at a time." It was strange. After all the chaos, my mind felt unusually quiet, like it was finally done fighting. I eventually parked outside a small roadside chai spot, the kind of place I had passed 100 times but never actually stopped at. The warm glow of its bulbs made it look like a tiny island in the dark. I sat on one of the plastic chairs outside and ordered a cup of tea. The steam curled upward, soft and slow, and I wrapped my hands around the glass like it was something grounding, something that reminded me I was still here. That was when my phone buzzed. My first instinct was to ignore it. My heart still wasn't ready for more conversations, more explanations, more anything. But the buzzing didn't stop. It blinked. And again, 4 missed calls, then 5, all from my best friend David. He rarely called more than once unless it was urgent. I sighed, lifted the phone, and pressed call back. He picked up immediately. "Where are you?" he asked. Not harsh, not demanding, just concerned in that quiet way he always spoke when he sensed I was holding onto something heavy. "I'm fine," I lied. He didn't buy it. "That's not what I asked." I closed my eyes for a moment and let the truth slip out. I. I just needed a moment. "Awesome," he said, tone lowering. "I'm already on the way, just send me your location." I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength to. A few minutes later, his car pulled up next to mine. He approached quietly, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes searching my face without asking anything. "You look tired," he finally said as he sat across from me. "I feel tired," I admitted. He nodded, waited, and let the silence settle comfortably between us until I was ready. I eventually spoke, my voice steady but soft. "It's over, completely. I walked away today." His eyes softened, but he didn't interrupt. "I thought I'd feel relieved," I continued, staring into my half-empty cup. "I thought leaving would make it easier, but right now it just feels like I'm standing in the middle of some empty space." "Of course it does," David replied gently. "You didn't just walk away from a relationship. You walked away from years of trying, of giving pieces of yourself, of believing things could change." I swallowed, feeling that familiar tightening in my throat. "I keep thinking about the red flags I ignored," I said quietly. "All the little moments I brushed aside because I thought maybe I was overreacting, maybe things would settle, maybe loyalty would be enough." "Loyalty," he repeated softly. "It should never come at the cost of your peace." A long pause. Then he asked, very carefully, "Do you regret it?" I stared at my hands for a long moment. "No," I said. "I don't regret choosing myself, I just regret how long it took." He smiled faintly. "Healing isn't instant, it's a slow morning after a long night, you'll see." I let out a slow breath, almost a sigh. "I hope so." We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the clatter of cups and distant traffic. For once, silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like rest. I spent the next few days living almost mechanically. I woke up. I made tea, I checked emails, I slept. Everything felt muted, like someone had lowered the volume on my emotions and left me with only the basics. My mother noticed, of course. Mothers always do. One evening, I was sitting on the balcony, just watching the sky dim into a warm orange shade when she came outside and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Beta," she said softly, "you don't have to pretend with me." I leaned back in the chair, eyes still fixed on the fading sky. "Am I pretending?" "Yes," she said gently. "You've been holding your breath for so long you don't even realize it." I looked at her then, the concern in her eyes, the warmth in her voice, and something inside me softened. She sat beside me, hands resting on her lap. "You made a hard choice," she said. "A painful one. Even the right decisions hurt sometimes." I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. "You will heal," she added. "Not today, not tomorrow, but gradually, like wounds that close slowly. One layer at a time." Her words stayed with me long after she returned inside. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. For some reason, sunlight felt a little warmer that day, or maybe I was just noticing it for the first time in a long while. I made myself breakfast, a proper one: eggs, toast, tea. I couldn't remember the last time I had eaten without rushing or feeling tense. And as I sat at the table, something unexpected happened. I smiled. Not a big smile, just a tiny, quiet one, but it was enough. It made me realize healing wasn't some sudden moment of clarity or a dramatic turning point. It was small things, tiny victories, like choosing to make breakfast or tidying my room or stepping out for air. I started going for evening walks. At first, it felt lonely. But slowly, I began to enjoy the rhythm of my footsteps, the simplicity of breathing fresh air, the feeling of moving forward even if my life felt paused. One evening, during one of those walks, David called again. "You sound better," he said after I answered. "I think I'm starting to be," I replied. "That's good," he said. "Progress isn't always loud." I chuckled softly. "Mine is barely a whisper." Whispers still count. He always had a way of grounding me. About a week later, something unexpected happened. My ex called. The screen lit up with her name, and for a moment, old instincts kicked in: confusion, hesitation, that familiar pit in my stomach. I stared at the phone until it stopped ringing. A minute later, a message appeared. "Can we talk?" Just 3 words, but they carried weight. I sat there for a long moment, breathing slowly, thinking. The old version of me, the one who always forgave too easily, would have replied immediately. But the person I was becoming, slowly, carefully, painfully, knew better. I typed back, "I don't think that would be helpful for either of us right now." She didn't argue, she didn't send more messages, and strangely, I felt at peace with that. It was the first time I had chosen myself over closure, and that in itself felt like healing. Later that night, I told David. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. I didn't need a long explanation. His words were enough. As days turned into weeks, my life began shaping itself again. Not back to what it used to be, but toward something new, something quieter, steadier, more intentional. I went back to my hobbies, reading, journaling, taking long drives with soft music. I spent more time with my family. I reconnected with old friends I had unintentionally distanced myself from. They welcomed me back without questions, without judgment. One evening, I found an old notebook, one I used to write in before everything became complicated. Flipping through its pages, I realized how much of myself I had slowly abandoned over the years. Without thinking too much, I tore out a blank page and wrote a single sentence at the top. "This is where I rebuild." And it felt right. A few more days passed and life started feeling lighter. Not perfect, never perfect, but manageable, softer, more mine. Then came the moment I didn't expect. I was sitting in the same roadside chai place where David had met me that first night. Same warm bulbs, same faint smell of cardamom in the air. A gentle breeze passed, and for the first time I didn't feel the weight of memories pressing on me. I felt present, truly present. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "I'm going to be okay." And this time I believed it. Not because someone told me, not because life had suddenly become easy, but because I had survived what I thought would break me and I was still here, still breathing, still choosing myself. That was my resolution, quiet, steady, deeply personal, and it was enough. In the weeks that followed, I found myself slipping into a quieter version of life, one that moved at its own pace, one that didn't demand explanations or apologies, one that finally felt like mine. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was just calm. And for the first time in a long while, calm felt like a gift I didn't know I had been missing. Most mornings, I woke up to sunlight filtering through my curtains, soft and warm. I'd sit with a cup of tea on the balcony and listen to the faint sounds of the neighborhood waking up: birds, distant traffic, a child laughing somewhere down the street. These small details had always been there, but I had never truly noticed them before. Now, they felt like tiny reminders that life didn't stop just because my heart had been bruised. One morning, as I watched the sky shift from pale orange to gentle blue, I realized something. I wasn't waiting anymore, not for closure, not for confrontation, not for answers that never really mattered. I was simply living. Later that day, I took a drive to a quiet lake on the edge of the city, a place I had visited years ago but somehow forgot. The water was still, like a sheet of glass reflecting the world with perfect honesty. I walked along the edge, hands in my pockets, breathing in the cold air. There, surrounded by silence, I allowed myself to think about everything one last time, without anger, without sadness, without that familiar ache in my chest. I thought about the version of me who had once believed he wasn't enough, the version who stayed too long, the version who apologized for things he didn't break, the version who loved so deeply he lost pieces of himself in the process. I felt sorry for him, not because he was weak, but because he was trying so hard to be strong in a place that kept taking from him. And then I thought about the version of me now, standing tall, breathing peacefully, choosing himself without guilt. It wasn't some grand transformation. It was quiet, gradual, like a sunrise spreading warmth over something that had been cold for too long. As I stood by the water, my phone vibrated in my pocket, a message from David. Lunch later, my treat. I smiled, Some friendships feel like home, steady, warm, unpretentious. Sure, I replied. Give me an hour. Before leaving, I sat on a rock near the edge of the lake and let the serenity settle into me. For a moment, I just closed my eyes and listened to the soft movement of water. That was when a thought surfaced, gentle, unexpected, but firm. I'm ready. Not ready for something new, not ready to fall in love again, not ready for excitement or chaos. Just ready to live without carrying the weight of the past. That was enough. Over lunch, David watched me for a moment, then chuckled softly. You look different, he said. How? I asked. Lighter, he replied, like you finally let go of something you were gripping with both hands. I took a sip of water, thinking about it. He wasn't wrong. I think I stopped trying to rewrite what already happened, I said, and started accepting what it taught me. And what did it teach you? He asked gently. I breathed in slowly, letting the answer come naturally. That sometimes, I said, the strongest thing you can do is walk away, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. He nodded, a small smile forming. Then you're healing, I shrugged lightly. I'm trying. Trying is enough, he said, and somehow hearing it from someone else made it feel even truer. Nights became easier too. I no longer replayed conversations in my head. I no longer questioned where things went wrong. I no longer wondered what I could have done differently. Some wounds don't heal because we force them closed. They heal when we stop picking at them. One night, while journaling, I wrote something that surprised me. I don't hate her, I don't love her, I don't miss her, I just release her. Writing it didn't mean the pain never existed. It didn't erase what happened. It didn't make everything perfect. But it made space. Space for peace. Space for clarity. Space for me. And maybe that was the point all along. As the days passed, people around me noticed the change, even if I didn't always see it. My mother began smiling more when she looked at me, like she could sense I was finding my way back to myself. My father invited me for drives more often. Even neighbors commented on how much calmer I seemed. Healing doesn't announce itself. It slips in quietly. You only notice it when others do. One evening, I took a slow walk around the neighborhood. The sky was dimming into shades of lavender, and the air carried the soft scent of chai and evening meals. I felt steady. I paused at a small park and sat on a bench watching children play, their laughter ringing through the air. For a brief moment, I felt a warmth in my chest, one that had nothing to do with the past and everything to do with the future. A soft realization settled over me. I'm not broken, I'm becoming. Becoming wiser. Becoming calmer. Becoming someone who chooses himself. Becoming someone who loves gently but never blindly. Becoming someone who knows when to stay and when to walk away. And as I stood up to leave, I whispered to myself quietly but with conviction, I'm going to be okay, not someday but now. Because healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey. A slow, steady, patient journey back to my own heart. And for the first time in a long while, I was finally home. Thanks for listening. If you like this story, please like, share and please subscribe my channel for support.